Welcome to Nacht Waffen Pilot with Penny Bradley. Today's guest is Leon Zagami, and he is famous as the Illuminati whistleblower, and I'm going to read his bio. Leon Zagami is a writer and researcher and the son of Dr. Leo Zagami, known Jungian analyst, writer, and co-founder of GAPA, independent group of analytical psychology, of which he was president. His grandfather was Senator Leopoldo Zagami, a Sicilian politician who was also a known historian and author, who married into the aristocratic family of the Marquis de Greggio. Leo's mother, Jessica Leon Young, is a member of the family of the Queen Mother of England. Her father, Henry Leon Young, was also a writer. Felicity Mason, her mother, Leo's maternal grandmother, helped Leo in developing his talents from a young age. Felicity was an old-time collaborator and friend of avant-garde eccentrics such as William Burroughs and Brian Gysin. She was also known under the pseudonym Anne Cumming, which made her famous in the 80s as a controversial novelist after working for many years in the cinema business with prestigious figures such as Fellini and Zeffirelli. Zagami, who is known for a brilliant career as Leo Young in the media and music industry as a record producer, became quickly popular on the web in 2006 because of his direct involvement in the New World Order and secret societies known to the majority of us as the Illuminati. His blog rose quickly and gained attention from people such as David Icke for its accurate, fully documented, groundbreaking inside information. Between 2009 and 2013, Zagami began publishing books in Europe and Japan based on a variety of subjects that range from the history of secret societies in the Vatican to geopolitical matters concerning the New World Order. In 2013, he collaborated with well-known Italian journalists Ferruccio Pinotti and Giacomo Galizzi in drafting a chapter for their Italian bestseller, Vaticano Massone, which was released in May 2013, dedicated to the secretive world of Vatican Freemasonry. And since our time is limited, I'll let you read the rest of it yourselves on his website, leozagami.com. Welcome, Leo.
It's a pleasure to be on your show, and after a long time, we finally managed to have at least a nice conversation about some of your favorite topics that you have indicated to me by email. So where we want to start depends from you, because as you know, we don't have that much time, but I will definitely answer to all your questions.
Well, when I was first figuring out what my personal memories were that I'm infamous for, one of the things that I found out was that I was born into this bloodline, and if we compared our trees, you and I would be distant cousins, like 7th, 8th generation, because I too am related to the Queen's family. But what surprised me were there have been 3, at least, men who have told me that they were Knights Templar, and they have sworn their swords to me. because I'm from that bloodline. And it's been confusing trying to get answers as to why they did this, how they were related at all to the Black Op that I was in. And I've been reading your book, and I'm going to show it for the camera so that the public knows that I'm reading it. This is book 1 of his 7 or 8 book series, and it's a good read, so I recommend it. It's Confessions of
Yes.
an Illuminati. So
regarding your topic of choice, as I told you by mail, I think that you will definitely enjoy even more volume 3 because it's kind of totally dedicated, mostly dedicated to the subject of both Templars and Neo-Templars, because modern Templars are not really descendants of the original order, and so we define them as Neo-Templars because the original order, as we all know, was dismantled, at least officially, and resurfaced through the Jesuits, through Freemasonry, and both within the degree systems of certain Masonic rites and also outside of Freemasonry altogether at the beginning of the 19th century during the Napoleonic era. So the Knights Templars are many things, but definitely they are a family tradition. And of course, as you pointed out, some people are prone to, in some way, respect maybe certain bloodlines more than others, or they are drawn to respect them. Now, having said that, the modern Neo-Templar orders are, there is a variety of them that are not much more than simply a social club where the members mostly like to dress in fancy with the cloak, with wearing the sword, and it's at times, unfortunately, a make or believe kind of setup where really there is no real connection to the real Templars. I must say, even within the degree system of, for example, the York Rite, there is, because you see, in the York Rite, they make Knights Templars, but it's not that these Templars will ever have a connection with certain bloodlines or necessarily go to church as knights and be invested as such, because those who are made within the Masonic lodges are mostly nominal, and it's just part of a teaching system that wants them to reenact certain things to better understand them. Regarding instead the certain other Neo-Templar groups, like I explain in volume 3, especially of my Confessions, they are connected to certain aristocratic and royal bloodlines that have found the urge to revive this Templar tradition. And often this urge was aided by some geopolitical or political interest. In the case of Neo-Templarism in general, we can say that it kind of like it's reborn and put back together in the 17th century, mostly because of the interest of the Jesuits to in that way, encourage even people who were in Protestant countries to have a new kind of connection with the Catholic world and with the Vatican. So, and then we have another thing that is very important to realize, the fact that the Knights Templars have also at times shifted from the traditional Catholic belief into what is known as the Johannite belief. system.
I had heard of the Johnites.
Yes, closer to John the Baptist. Actually have a text here, which I might pick up so I can show you. But in general, just to be more succinct about it, we can say that the Knights Templars of today have been revived by people who not always had the original connections with those family lines. But there have been some instances, in the case of Portugal, for example, with a specific branch there that was originally, was basically brought together by an aristocrat who had a lot of success and was very much respected into this Masonic Templar world, and at that point, Sosa Fontes, that is the name for those who might want to know more about him, is Antonio Campello Pinta de Sosa Fontes, who died in 1960, was the last heir of a Neo-Templar genealogy that dated back to the times of the French Revolution. But as you can see, it dated back to the times of the French Revolution, which means not that far into, because the original Knights Templars were instead, of course, eliminated officially from the history of the Catholic Church with the death of Jacques de Molay, their last Grand Master, and some of them then ended up in Scotland, taking refuge with King Robert the Bruce, which was, by the way, an ancestor of mine, and so Robert the Bruce, he kind of like protected those Templars, who then ended up participating also to the war that he was engaging with England. But having said that, when I met with Lord Elgin, who is the Grand Master, or at least used to be the Grand Master of the Royal Order of Scotland, and of course he is traditionally somebody who is linked also by bloodline to the Templars, he said, Leo, it's true, but there were not that many that could really cause a difference in the state of the battle that was engaged. But it was symbolic, let's say. It was symbolic, and it was important that Robert the Bruce symbolically became almost the protector of the Templars. It was like...
If my history is correct, Robert the Bruce was excommunicated for doing that, and so was the entire nation of Scotland while he was protecting them.
Well, at that time, kings could be, or emperors even, could be excommunicated by the Vatican whenever they didn't really fit their own agenda. In the Battle of Bannockburn in 1314, that was the battle in which Robert basically defeated the English, led by Edward the Second, and at that point, there was some Knights Templar present in that battle, and for that reason, it kind of like gave birth successively to a possibility of another order. I think that at this point, of course, we might get too technical here about all the various orders and stuff, but I would say that the Templar military services in Freemasonry with Chevalier de Ramsay, when there was a war in England, especially between those who wanted to bring back Catholicism and to lead the country. So basically, there was a war between the Stuart family and the Hanoverians. Now, the Stuart family was connected to the Catholic Church, and they fought until the beginning of the 19th century to to regain their place as the royal house for the English people. It never happened, though. It never happened. But in that period of confrontation, the Templar myth was used and relaunched within Freemasonry, because at that point, the people who joined these high degrees that then became the ancient and accepted Scottish Rite, but also the York Rite, all these high degrees that featured the Templars, became in a way beneficial to the cause of the Stuart family and for the Catholic cause and for the Jesuits who were trying to aid and abet it. So there is, of course, all these things that needed to be said, because otherwise people might either romanticize too much the whole idea or either have the wrong idea altogether. I would say that
most of the people that I have asked about it have just basically told me, oh, gasp, the Templars are evil, and they have no real reason for it. It's just rumors, innuendos, bullshit.
Okay. Let's say this, the Templars, you see, we talked about the dismantling of the Knights Templars, and why is it so important to understand that at that time they were accused of heresy. Now, they were accused of heresy on the 18th of March, 1314, not far away from Notre Dame. The last Grand Master was burnt, and he, of course, in turn launched a curse. That curse apparently worked out, because both the king, the pope, everybody basically died within the time frame of his curse. But it's the most important thing here to understand is that before Jacques de Molay was burnt in the island in the River Seine, he basically had probably hidden a treasure, which apparently ended up then as a matter I mean, it became legendary, you know, this treasure of the Knights Templars. Nobody really know where it ends up, but in the end we can say that the Knights Templar, though, survived within those families that were part of the high level of the hierarchy. But there was some problems there with the accusations of heresy, and that's why people tend to say they are Satanists, because apparently there was a vast network of these Templar churches all over Europe. At the time, there wasn't an immediate connection between a church, and you couldn't send an email. You couldn't just make a phone call. And some apparently of these churches went into in an heretical modality. For example, in Turkey, there was found in one Templar church in particular, a cross with the image of Mohammed on it. Now, that is itself kind of a paradox, because the Muslims, they don't like any kind of image of their prophet. But in reality, from a study that was done by a friend of mine who is no longer with us, Gabriele Mandelkhan, he was a Sufi, the head of the Sufi Gerai Helveti. He discovered that, because once they discovered this cross in the 1950s in Turkey, they immediately made it disappear. You know, they put it in some... They didn't want it out in the open because it didn't fit any narrative. It kind of was controversial, but some photos were made, and he was able to publish it on this dictionary of Islam in Italy. And he sent a photo to me, which I still have. And that photo, in fact, I published in one of my books. Okay. Now, regarding though the nature of that heresy, it was basically that some Shiite group within Islam was very close to the Templars. We know that the Templars had also been linked in some way with the Assassins, which was another sect within within Shiite Islam. And at the end of all this, though, we can say that maybe it was an isolated factor that only touched certain churches of the Knights Templars that were present maybe in Turkey or in the Middle East. It wasn't generalized, this heresy, okay? And then there was another part of the Knights Templars that had embraced also a belief that Jesus didn't die on the cross. And for that reason, they despised the actual cross in secret. This is another of their heresies.
Okay.
And
so
that
they didn't follow the Nicene Creed.
No, they basically, then that was filtered within some teachings in the ancient accepted Scottish Rite that basically make the candidate on the 30th degree reject the cross altogether and spit. And basically, there is almost a rejection of the cross because that symbolizes something that for them couldn't happen, which was the crucifixion of Jesus. Because let's remember that in the Quran, somebody else is sent on the cross. So there was some kind of heresy going on. There was also some Templars that were accused of homosexuality, of having practiced sodomy. That was another heresy that was also but all these accusations, let's remember, could have been done at the time, of course, to discredit the Templars, but some of them could have had some elements of truth, though.
Any time that you have a group of people, they're going to have variants of views, and some of them are not going to be the standard for the whole group.
Now, first of all, the King of France wanted their money, wanted the properties. The properties actually were then given, some of them to the Knights of Malta, to what became known after later on as the Knights of Malta, the Knights of Spirit. So there was a lot of interest to get rid of the Knights Templars because they were powerful bankers. So there was some geopolitical interest there. Philippe the Fair, Philippe the Fourth of France, he, of course, started to arrest them on Friday the 13th in 1307. I mean, there was, of course, also the link to the infamous Friday the 13th. But he started to arrest them in 1307, torturing them, and often forcing them to make false confessions. So there is all kinds of things that must be said, bring us to analyze this not in a very clear optic because of what happened. I mean, if you are torturing somebody and somebody tells you, I was worshipping, I don't know what, but you're torturing, I mean, you can't necessarily think that the guy is being genuine. He's simply desperate and he's trying to survive. I mean, so
well, most people would say whatever they thought you wanted to hear just to get you to stop.
Yeah. But whatever was said at that time was in any way used in the centuries after that to cast the Knights Templars in a dark light, let's say. And that is where it all comes from. Having said that, the Templars survived in limited numbers, protected, for example, by Robert the Bruce, but also in other parts of Europe, even if not in such, they transformed, for example, in Portugal, where I discussed before, there was that Neo-Templar figure, but earlier on, just immediately after the dismantling of the Knights Templar, they resurfaced with another name. They changed name. They kind of like slightly changed their name and kind of like tried to still survive maybe with their own traditions. But the Catholic Church didn't want to have them around any longer, even if there is, of course, evidence that, and this is evidence that I discussed very much in volume 3 of my Confessions, the Templars were always a force that was used as they have the ability to dominate the Muslim territories with very few men, because they were capable of putting one Muslim faction against the other, and they were able to resist for a long time in the Holy Land. When that crusade factor faded out, there was no longer reason for keeping them alive when they had gathered so much power and riches. When they eventually resurfaced in Europe, there was already another order that had taken their place, and that was the Society of Jesus, aka the Jesuits, which were actually built upon the inspiration, taking inspiration from the Knights Templars. During the Reformation, there had to be a counter-reformation, but the Vatican didn't have a military order like the Knights Templars that worked as a Vatican intelligence, as military order, as holy men, all together in one. They didn't have that.
Didn't they have the Teutonic Knights
No, because they were not considered as capable of merging into another culture. The Teutonic Knights, of course, together with the Knights of the Holy Sepulchre, which was the first knighthood, and the Knights of Hospitaliers, later on Knights of Rhodes and Knights of Malta, they worked in a way that was at times with the laity. So, but they were not capable of merging so much with the other cultures that surrounded them. The Knights Templars were literally capable of merging with those cultures. That's why at times, like I just said, there was the accusation of heresy, because some of them took it maybe too further, So
that makes sense.
Yeah, but in reality, the Jesuits became like that. The Jesuits were capable of abandoning their Catholic nature and embracing whatever was put in front of them. When they shaped up the Jesuits in 1530, and they eventually got accepted by the Pope in 1540, the actual founder himself had already been arrested 5 times by the Inquisition. He wasn't really like this hero of the Catholic Church. But the Pope eventually embraced him. And at that point, the first thing he did was to send his missionaries to the Far East. And when they arrived to the Far East, they merged with the Chinese culture, arriving at the level of Matteo Ricci to even be advisor to the emperor. But they then went back to the Vatican and wanted to bring the Chinese rites to the Vatican. And there was this controversy, which I described in volume 4 of my Confessions, the Chinese controversies that went on for like 6 or 7 popes, in which the Jesuits were trying to convince the Vatican to adopt Confucius rites in the Vatican. Some unheard stuff. And then there was another Jesuit who was sent to Tibet. He didn't try to bring Christianity to Tibet. He became a Tibetan monk and then brought back everything he learned from the monasteries with him.
That sounds like Thomas Merton.
But the same thing happened also with the Brahmins in India. They went, the Jesuits, and then they absorbed the culture of the Brahmins, which is the elite of the Hindu culture. So they didn't want to bring the gospel of Christ to the poor. No, they wanted to absorb other cultures and bring their knowledge back to the Vatican. So that is more in line with what the Templars were doing. But the Templars kind of it didn't work out for them, and in the end, it became their weak spot. But the Jesuits then, when Ignazio Loyola went to the Pope to get his order accepted, he actually said, he went to the Pope and he said, we need an order that fights the Protestant insurgent. There was, the Protestant were starting their process, and it was a process that led to the breakup of a lot of the Christian world. The Jesuits were never able, though, to go to the Orthodox Church that had broken from the Vatican hundreds of years earlier, because the maximum they did was actually to make some alliance And in fact, when the Jesuits were suddenly persecuted by most governments in Europe, and in the 1770s, they were casted out of the Vatican altogether, they actually managed to get the protection of the Empress of Russia, and they moved to Russia, which is unheard of because it was Orthodox territory.
Yeah, that was Orthodox territory, still is now.
Yeah, but the Jesuits were so transformative that they could, fluently go from one thing to the other. So when it comes down to the Freemasonry, of course, have some elements that are connected to the Knights Templars, because there was this connection with the Stuart family. There was a rite called the Rite of Strict Templar Observance, which was one of the first rites of Freemasonry in the 1750s, was the first rite that actually started, because Freemasonry was 3 degrees, and 3 degrees that, of course, were connected, historically speaking, mostly to the guilds and to the builders of the churches. But let's not forget that the builders of the churches at times were, in the case of the Knights Templars, some very skilled builders with some very particular knowledge. That's why we have some churches that have a very specific hidden meaning, or layers of hidden meaning that needs to be deciphered. No? So when I wrote volume 3 of my confession, Espionage, Templars, and Satan in the Shadows of the Vatican, I wanted to dedicate a whole book to this subject because it's obviously fascinating, but also because I wanted to make people understand the connections between the Templars and Freemasonry. And I did it by explaining them the history of the Sikh Temple observance, which was connected to the Stuart family, was connected to the aristocratic families that were still traditionally linked to the Templars. Because it's true, the order was dismantled, but then in secret, it continued. The history of the Sikh Temple observance actually tells you exactly how it continued, with these Grand Masters that, of course, were not public, but were underground. From father to son, there was a transmission of this knowledge in certain families, so the Templar tradition could be perpetrated, and the secrets, like, for example, Rosslyn Chapel, just to name, just one famous place, also because of the Da Vinci Code, everybody knows about it. But Rosslyn Chapel is connected to the Sinclair family. Sinclair family has an historic tradition with the Templars. I was a friend of the late Sir Ian Sinclair, and with him we made a very interesting interview in 2010, which you can still find on YouTube.
Okay, I'll look for that.
And so what happened was that in southern France, in Montpellier, that's where De Molay held 2 general meetings of his order before it was dismantled. There was a meeting in 1293, then there was another one in 1296. And he tried to make some reforms because he knew that things could become very dangerous for him. In the autumn of 1296, Molay was back in Cyprus to defend his order against the interests of Harry II of Cyprus. And then Molay engaged in a new attack against the Mamelukes, always within the Islamic world. And then the plan was to coordinate actions between the Christian military orders, the King of Cyprus, the nobility of Cyprus, the forces of in Armenia, of Syrian Armenia, and a new potential ally, which were the Mongols, which I know it seems as an unlikely ally, but to oppose the Egyptian Mamelukes that were particularly dangerous for the Christian world because they were aiming for the coastal city of Tortosa in Syria. Yeah. So what happened here is that at one point, though, the documents of these two general meetings, and everything that was discussed was left in the archives that were in Montpellier. And as I described in volume 3 of my Confessions, those archives then ended up in the hands of the strict Templar observants of Baron Knig, who was this German who had been initiated in France, but then from Germany had manifested one of the most influential Masonic orders of his time. In fact, the Order of the Illuminati was actually born within the strict Templar observance, the network. When the French Revolution started, then at that point, the aristocrats felt
in the 1700s.
Yes, at that point, the Knights Templars, we can consider them Knights Templars, though they were not directly formally Knights Templars. They were Knights Templars linked from those families who had joined Freemasonry, who had then, as a secret Grand Master, a member of the Stuart family, Prince Bonnie Prince Charles. It's like, and so what happened was that when the French Revolution started and they felt threatened, they had to bring their archives somewhere else. And at that point, they first of all changed the name of the order. So they wanted no longer to be called Templars, but Chevalier Bénéficiaires de la Cité Sainte, which is beneficiary knights of the Holy City. At that point, they brought their archives to Switzerland, and that's where they stayed. The archives of the remaining archives that in some way had survived near Montpellier, the place where Jacques Desmoulins conducted his. And I went there since I was a kid. My father used to bring me there every year in a place called Besançon. And it was like, for me, a tradition to go there every year with my father, eat food, go. It's a very nice, it's the Champagne region, so it's a very nice place to go also. But it was in this place that the original archives were kept until the beginning of the French Revolution. Then they were moved to Switzerland. This gave Switzerland a very important role. Also,
yeah, you think.
and of course, knowing of the Templars were the ones who invented the banking system, then you just need to do 1 + 1 is 2, and it's very clear how we see Switzerland assuming a very important and pivotal role in the world of the Knights Templar. In fact, these days, Switzerland is not a country that adopts the ancient and accepted Scottish rite or practices it so much. Maybe there is some lodges that practice it, but not many. The main rite that is practiced by the Masons of the Grand Lodge Alpina, which is the official Masonic body there, is the Christian Masonic rite known as the Rectified Scottish Rite, which is basically the strict Templar observance that was reformed with the Chevalier Bénéficiaire de la Cité Sainte. So they have a direct link in Switzerland, even within Freemasonry. Freemasonry in Switzerland is Christian. It's not like universal. It's strange because Freemasonry is usually considered a universal thing in most of the countries of the world where all religions can join. But there is certain countries where this is not true. For example, Scandinavia, the Swedish Rite, and I explain in my book why the Swedish Rite was basically formed by the last Grand Master of the strict Templar observance. So it was a strict Templar observance derivative that obliged all the Masons to be Christians. And I myself had revived the strict Templar observance a few years ago when I was in Italy to attempt to bring back Christianity into Freemasonry. And I was actually nominated the Grand Master. And I was a Grand Master of this strict Templar observance and the province of the strict Templar observance, the Italian province, because each country is considered a province. yeah, or a number of countries, depending, because the original provinces were, of course, based on countries that no longer exist at times with the present borders. But it was an experience for me, and it was a very positive one, because I could have access to their archives. I could understand a lot of things. And also, I was invited to commanderies with the Neo-Templars from the OSMTJ, OSMTH, which are themselves outside of the boundaries of Freemasonry, because they brought out of the boundaries of Freemasonry part of Neo-Templarism in the period when Napoleon was in charge. There was a lot of talk about the fact that the last king of France was killed because he was a descendant of Philip IV of France. So it was like the French Revolution was constructed amongst the lodges, also Freemasonry, following the Templar myth, as a revenge against the death of Jacques de Molay. They had to kill the last king of France. That is basically what.
That was a detail that I had missed.
Well, I hope that today I can give. I gave you at least a few more details. For example, just published a book, which is this, which gives ulterior details regarding all this, because you see, in going back to the present world we are living, the Great Reset, everybody's talking about the Great Reset, but nobody had made a book about the occult roots of the Great Reset. And the occult roots of the Great Reset are based on a number of lodges and works that were conducted in places like Switzerland. So we go back to Switzerland. Austria, Germany, and of course, we can find also connections with the Teutonic Knights, because you mentioned the Teutonic Knights. The Teutonic Knights are very important because they have their own bases in places where the Templars were not present. For example, the Estonia, or the Baltic region, or Sweden itself is a Teutonic stronghold. But having said, Norway is more of a Templar stronghold. So, but these. That's why the Swedish Rite that is practiced in most of these countries in the north of Europe has very much, is very different from any kind of Masonic rite that you can encounter here. I mean, they are knights. Before they are, you don't see a compass and a square in front of the temples in Norway or Sweden or Finland.
Really?
Now, maybe in Finland, but in Norway and Sweden, you never see a compass and a square. You see a red cross of the Knights Templars. That's it.
Okay.
So that is very important for people to, in my book, volume 3 of my Confessions, I published a rare image of the charter of the Grand Priory of Helvetia, the Chevalier Beneficent, that basically was reactivated in 1935, because there was also a period that then in which at one point the French wanted to reactivate themselves, the Knights Templars, but they didn't have any more, neither the documents, neither the lineage, they didn't have the rituals, they didn't have anything. So what they did, the Grand Priory of the Gaul, which basically is the real Priory of Zion, because the people involved in the whole Priory of Zion is a big myth, but the real Priory of Zion is actually the Grand Priory of the Gaul, that to start again their activities in France, and the first manifestation of the modern Priory of Zion went to Switzerland in 1935. They got a document, which I published in volume 3 of my Confession. It's a signed document with stamps, seals, everything. Okay. And you can find it in the book, in volume 3 of my Confessions. And so that's why at page 40 of it. So the transformation of the District Temple of Servants was very important for the whole of the Masonic world in those turbulent years preceding and after the French Revolution, in which nobody wanted to have anymore a right which was based on bloodlines, because it didn't work with the bourgeois and with the French revolutionists, because here there were people cutting the heads of the aristocrats and the royals, and you couldn't have a right that was respecting that as one. Instead, in Sweden, where there was a king who really wanted to carry on this legacy, he picked up when the Grand Master and founder of the Sect of Servants, Baron Knig, died. He picked up this. It was around 1776 that this happened. He picked up the right and he transformed it in the Swedish Rite. That's why when you go and see the Grand Master of the Swedish Rite, he has an apron with the red cross. He doesn't have any compass, any square, just a simple red cross. And that is the Knights Templars, of course. So it's very different. I mean, of course, I will say that most Masons these days, even here in the United States of America, they don't know a lot of the things that we discussed today. Okay. They only know, though, that when they have to go to visit a lodge in Sweden or in Norway, they will not be welcome inside the lodges if they're not at least a 30th degree or a Knights Templar of the York Rite. They don't let them in. And people come to me and say, why is possible? I went there, I'm a regular Mason, you know, I'm in good standing, but they didn't let me inside the lodge. And I say, but you know the rules. The rules are that you have to have the Templar degree to join those lodges, even from their enter-apprentice working. I mean, it's a strange thing because you see, Freemason is a universal thing. And usually a Freemason will always have the possibility to join the workings of a lodge, wherever he is in the world, recognizing it. But
my great-grandfather transferred from Searcy, Arkansas to Visalia, California with no problem at all.
Yeah, because it's no problem. Of course, there might be here in California a little bit different ritual than the one there, so they just adapt and that's it, you know? They learn a new ritual. But when it comes down instead to I remember one day there was a friend of mine from Cuba, Freemason from Cuba. He was an 18th degree. He was a chef. He was a chef. He was working as a chef in Oslo, in Norway. He came to me and he said, Leo, I wanted to go inside the lodge. They didn't let me in. I said, but what degree are you? I said, well, I'm an 18th degree. I said, well, the rules are clear. You have to be a 30th degree because you haven't learned yet the Templar. The Templar knowledge comes from the 30th to the 33. So you are not in it. They can't let you in a lodge. And he was like, okay. And so there was always this kind of, and plus a lot of things have happened since in the last few decades, including the fact that they have closed down the NATO lodge. They have some English-speaking lodges in Norway, but they closed them down. So now you will have to go there in Norwegian, not understanding anything, and probably, you know, they are very strict on what they want to show, because the rituals they do are very dramatic, but they're also very interesting in a way. And so the founder of the Strict Temple of Servants was Baron Knig, but he was also a leading member of the Order of the Illuminati. So the Order of the Illuminati recruited from the Strict Temple of Servants. At one point, there was an important event that happened around 1782, 1784. There was some important conferences in the Masonic world. One was in Wilhelmsbad, the other one was in Paris. These events characterized the future of Freemasonry and then brought it to what it is now. But those, I mean, here we're talking about important events and important figures that were involved at that time. Benjamin Franklin, George Washington, and God knows what. I mean, we have the very foundations of the United States of America in the Strict Temple of Servants, for example, which is completely not known here in America. And in fact,
a lot of Americans think that all of the founding fathers were good Christians and
but in
but they
theory,
weren't necessarily.
I will not say that they were not. I would say that at that time,
Well, Thomas Jefferson wasn't.
no, but I will say that, for example, some of them who were following the Christian tradition of Freemasonry,
okay,
because they were Christian Freemasons at that time, who were following a Christian only. See, the strict Templar servants didn't want any occult in their lodges, didn't want anything that was blasphemous towards Christianity, and accepted only Christians in their lodges. The thing came later on when you had other rites that started to include elements of the occult, the Egyptian rite of Cagliostro that was brought in. Then the ancient and accepted Scottish rite became also a way to include a lot of teachings that were kind of like not so Christian inclined, or at least more open to a vision that went beyond traditional Christianity. And also because they were open to non-Christians. At one point, they even reformed the rites to make possible for Jewish people to come in, and then Muslims, and then all the others. So then they had to eliminate their Christian elements. But that is not in the case of the first founders. Okay, you said, of course, Jefferson, but we have to understand that Benjamin Franklin, for example, is a very controversial figure. He was involved with the Hellfire Clubs.
Yeah.
And that is not very Christian. But it's also true that, for example, George Washington was very Christian in his approach to Freemasonry also. And there were other members of the craft who were very Christian. So problem is that nowadays, in the year 2022, I, for example, don't feel at ease going inside the lodges here in California. And I tried to see if, when I moved here, if I could be interested in continuing, because of course, but I saw there is too many elements I didn't like. I didn't like the fact that they were promoting leftist values. There shouldn't be any discussion of religion and politics, but there was actually, even if not strictly within the Masonic meetings, but there was outside of the Masonic meetings, and there was a former grandmaster who actually criticized openly Donald J. Trump. There were people I know that only because of wearing a MAGA hat were kind of cornered and kind of ghettoized in their lodge. There was also elements from the occult world, the OTO, who openly promoted the rubbish inside their Masonic lodges here in California. The same, also the Muslim Brotherhood, openly promoting their bullshit here in California. So, I mean, there was...
OTO is probably one of the most evil things that I've ever encountered.
Yes, and here in California, unfortunately, after I joined, because you see, I came here in 2019 and I immediately saw if I wanted to, continue here. But when I saw that within the lodges, there was this big presence of OTO members and that they were kind of like really leading the other brothers astray, I was not comfortable with staying in those, in that kind of environment. And they were all over the place. So I think that Freemasonry here in California is completely gone. In Nevada, there was actually a grandmaster who I write, in fact, about also in I think volume 4 of my confessions. I actually described what happened to him. He tried to make it clear that the only sacred book of the law was the Bible. Immediately he was attacked by every single grandmaster in America, like, ooh, the Bible, you should have put also the Quran, this and that and all the other. Here in California, they have even used the book of the law of Aleister Crowley as the book for the initiation. So that is the level that they are trying to promote here. So that's why my books have unveiled all these problems that, of course, are not known to the outside world.
Mhm.
But then I wanted to also explain the fact that the Illuminati infiltrated the strict temple observance, as well as the Jesuits. The Jesuits even created a group called the Cleric Templars with a guy called Stark, who
I
was
hadn't heard of that one at all.
the Clerical Templars of a gentleman called Stark. It's actually not a very well-known, but they made an alliance and were accepted at one point within the strict Templar observance, but they were actually infiltrating it on behalf of the Jesuits. The Jesuits who had already control of the Golden Rose Croix, which was the Golden Rose Cross was another Masonic group that sprang in the 1750s, also connected to the Sabbatean Frankists, by the way. So there is a connection then between these very important groups of heretics, because I consider the Jesuits heretics, and I consider the Sabbatean Frankists within the Jewish world, of course, heretics, as they are considered by most of the Jewish world. And it's very difficult to explain to people all these things. So that's why it takes maybe several books for me, to explain these concepts. And so I try to do it in a way that the normal folk understands. But there was definitely an attempt to sabotage the Christian side of Freemasonry, and the Illuminati did it very well, because in the end, they also infiltrated the Swedish Rite. The upper degree of the Swedish Rite became infiltrated by the Illuminati. And so in the end, the Illuminati then started to promote what we all know now as communism. And the idea that Jesus was a communist and that there was no belief in the kingdom of God, because kingdom. So, I mean, it's a concept they didn't like. That's why they pushed for the destruction of all the absolute monarchies that were connected with Christianity. And this is one of the subjects that I touch also in this book, in my latest book, Volume 7, because there is basically the Illuminati wanted to destroy all the monarchy and the religions and make a godless society. So after they arrived with the French Revolution and all that, then we start seeing the birth of constitutional monarchies that are the only ones that survived the Illuminati purge. Yeah. So when you go in Europe and you see, for example, there is a monarchy that was still in England, control.
Well, no, they're completely
controlled.
They're completely out of it. They're figureheads.
Yeah, for
drama.
But they are controlled, just as the monarchy in Holland, the monarchy in Sweden, or the monarchy. All these monarchies had to be infiltrated and controlled. That is what the Illuminati wanted, and they said it in their instructions. That's why it's very important to lay on their own facts. My book is based on their own text. It's not based on some hypothesis or some
I'm reading the first volume, and I've noticed that you're actually inserting the real texts into the book so that you can read their words for yourself. You don't have to take your word for it.
Yeah, no, because then people, also the important thing here is that we are fighting against a world that defends itself with having protected all the system through the academic world. So you can't really touch on this subject without being called just a conspiracy theorist that doesn't have any connection to reality, because then the academic guy will come there and say, no, but the real thing is this and this is that. No. In my books, I give you the academic reference, the archives, the things, and I say, this is it. You make your judgment. And I think that is the best way to promote really a true understanding of these subjects, because I understand that in the initial phase, people like David Icke, people like, people like that could have had some kind, and actually I must thank him myself, because he helped me out in my launching me, like you said at the beginning when you introduced me with the bio. But the problem is that these people didn't have an inside experience, but they were outsiders. And they started to speculate about things like reptilian and whatever, all kinds of things. And because it was done in a certain way, it just brought people like a serious, it was very easy for the system to say, oh, that is just a lunatic, just a crazy guy where is the evidence? They always say, where is the evidence? And that's why I based my confessions on evidence, hard evidence. That's it.
I appreciate it, because I'm reading along and the documents are there. I'm not having to go and hunt things down. And when you give a reference to a historical document, I'm I'm able to do a search and find a PDF copy of the historical document, and I'm saving those. And because
for a further research, because that's what I really would like people to do, a further research that can maybe lead to other books. You can write your own book basing your references from my book, and maybe going into some.
I've been trying to write a book about my experience, and in my own experience, I was part of an order, and that order tracks to a group called the Lords of the Black Stone, which came out of the Tula Gesellschaft, which came out of the Teutonic Knights, which absorbed a lot of the people that survived the purge of the Knights Templar.
But for example, when it comes down to the Tula stuff, I would say that they were born thanks to the Rudolf von Sembotendorf, who was the founder of this order, of course, of this lodge order, however you want to mention, because it was part of a order of racist. They were racist in the sense that they wanted to push the German ideal, but they were also behind the scenes. Rudolf von Sembotendorf was in Turkey. He was in connection in Salonico with a secret order of Sabbatean Frankists that basically pushed him. And I write, and actually I explain this with documents. He practiced what is known as and I write about this, and you will find it at the end of volume 1. This book called the Ottoman this Turkish Freemasonry, basically. But it's not the Turkish Freemasonry, the traditional Freemasonry that you find based on the classic Hiram Abif. No, this form of Freemasonry was based on the magical use of reading certain surahs of the Quran repeatedly, until you will alchemically transform yourself and become a vehicle for God. Now, unfortunately, you don't become really a vehicle for God, you become a vehicle for Satan. And the guy who used this particular form of Freemasonry was Adolf Hitler, who was given a copy of this book while he was in prison because he had been arrested.
That explains a lot. So what I have also tracked through is the predominant thing in the order that I was in was the use of what we called black goo. And I've tracked that through the different orders back to the Cathari. So I've been looking for the historical earth-based, where did this come from?
But Rudolf von Sembotendorf was given this initiation, this or knowledge together with an initiation probably by these people in Salonicco, because they wanted to take revenge upon the fact that the Ottoman Empire had been sabotaged by the British force, by England, but at the same time also had been sabotaged by certain Jewish elements, because the last wife of the Ottoman, the head of the Ottoman Empire, was herself Jewish. But in Turkey, you have the Dome, which are basically the Sabbatians, which have, as you know,
I had not dug into the Turks yet. So
yeah, no, I think that if you want to have a deeper understanding of, as you said, you said that there is a connection with the Thule Gestalt, which was founded officially in 1919. You should go back to study the history of Rudolf Fossen-Bottendorf, which is the founder, and you will find that he was also connected with the Golden Dawn, with the Society Rosicruciana in Anglia. So there is also some connection there. I don't know if you knew about that.
I knew about the Golden Dawn and the Rosicrucians.
Yeah,
I did not know about the Turks.
There was that was his most important connection. The secret practice of the Sufi Freemasons that are known as the Islamic teachings at the heart of alchemy, and actually they're very interesting. I mean, so just to look, you can find it easily on the internet. You can find the book Secret Practices of the Sufi Freemasons, connected to the Bektashi order of Sufis, and written by Baron Rudolf Fossen-Bottendorf.
Okay.
So it's a very much because then there is the connection also with the Bektashi, which it's a branch of the Islamic world, which was then connected and practiced in Albania. That's why now Albania is being kind of brought back into their Islamic reality after the period during the Soviet times. Albania
the Soviet
was
area. Everybody was basically forbidden to be who they were.
Yeah, but now that, of course, they want to bring also Albania in the heart of Europe, closer to Islam. So there is a lot of financing that, no? But I must say that it's very interesting, the life of Rudolf Fossen-Bottendorf. So in general, he was definitely a very particular kind of figure. Not many people know why. At the end of the Second World War, suddenly this guy was found dead in a river in the Bosphorus.
He probably deserved it. But
or some people say he might have killed himself after the death of Adolf Hitler, because he felt himself he was actually the creator of Adolf Hitler. He actually had written a book that was then censored by Hitler himself on how he helped the making of Adolf Hitler. So
okay, that will be something else I'll look for. I have a collection of books from that era that I have gotten underground because they are so heavily censored and not translated into English.
Yeah,
and
that's a problem. A lot of things are not in they are not translated. But regarding Fossen-Bottendorf, he was before he founded the tool. He was, of course, a Freemason. He was connected to. He was a Sufi. Was connected to the Bektashi order. He converted to Islam. Islam became very important then at that point for the Nazis. And that's why there was an alliance all along between the Islamic world and
the group that I was in, and I wasn't in there of my free will. Okay, I had been kidnapped and I was plopped into this. So they had this thing that all religion was the source of all hatred. So it was
Well, I mean,
an atheistic.
there was an
lot of
atheistic view of things because in reality, the tool that was born out of the German order, which was basically, like I said, some kind of racist, the spreading anti-Semitic material. Now, everything regarding the birth of this anti-Semitism-driven national socialistic movement is described in my book because I talk about those German and Austrian lodges. And when it comes down to Austrian Germany, then there is that theosophical milieu that gave birth to Adolf Hitler. Hitler found the swastika on the cover of publication by Franz Hartmann, who was a known German Rosicrucian and theosophist as well.
That name I know.
Yeah, but for example, not many people know that Franz Hartmann inspired Adolf Hitler with the swastika. You know, it's like, and for that reason, in this book is very important because I go through all the lodges that were influenced by the Illuminati lodges became like, I say in this book, became like the Wuhan lab of communism because the League of the Just sprang out of there. And so Karl Marx, of course, published the manifesto for the League of the Just. And everything that happened with communism filtered from the original ideas of Adam Weishaupt and his followers in both Germany, but also in Paris, because he had a lot of followers also in Paris. So, and this really are the people who later on started this infamous spreading of what is, I think, one of the most perverse and dangerous ideology in the history of mankind, which is, of course, socialism/communism. So thank you so much for having me today, and I was able to, I hope, answer to most of your questions. You were asking me briefly also in the email that you sent me, the black ops that were connected with the secret societies. I was part of one of them in the Monte Carlo Lodge, and I can say that simply these black ops are triggered and use this secret society or these lodges that are irregular, no, not regular lodges. Most of these lodges are irregular. The lodges that are regular tend to work the traditional craft. Of course, there is then some lodges that more exclusive within maybe an obedience that, like the Grand Lodge of England, that, for example, still to this day, the Grand Lodge of England has a lodge that talks in German, meeting in London, Pilgrim Lodge 238, which was the lodge which saw the participation of and the initiation of Theodor Reuss, the co-founder of the OTO. The OTO, though, like I explained in this book, was co-founded by a guy who was in Austria. It wasn't in Germany. And it's in Austria that we find the birthplace of Adolf Hitler, that we find a lot of things that are then linked to the birth of the one world religion. And I explain this in my new book, which of course nowadays is manifesting through Pope Francis, but also through his assistant, Father Wenninger, who used to be an Austrian ambassador until 2009. His wife died and he was made a Monsignor, and now is in the Vatican working with Pope Francis, and he is officially a Freemason, a chaplain as a priest to 3 lodges in Austria. And he has written a book, how to basically be a good Catholic and a good Freemason, a kind of like apologetic book, which is like almost impossible to even accept as a Catholic if you are a traditional Catholic. But as these people are not traditionalists, but they are simply trying to merge everything together, Father Benninger is the guy, in fact, who is...
I was sitting here in shock. The idea of a good Catholic and a good Freemason at the same time is...
But he wrote it. He wrote it, and actually I have here in my book a photo of him with the Grand Master of Freemason in Austria, where he presents his book. I have a photo of him with a group of Muslims and the Vice President of the Academy of the Illuminati. I have basically evidence when I talk. So that is...
when they combine all these things, who are they going to make make in charge of it?
Well, they want basically the rise of the Antichrist is imminent, as well as a cyber Satan that controls all of it, and the mark of the beast that they are trying to implement in the next 8 years before 2030, which is the year in which they want to have the full control of this new world order. So thank you so much for having me on. And I want to say that today maybe we didn't have much time. Hopefully in a few months we can meet again, and I will deliver.
I would enjoy that.
And I will deliver more. Maybe you can continue reading my books, so then you can collect more questions for me and we can discuss them the next time.
That sounds wonderful.
Thank you very much. All the best then.
Thank you. Well, to put some context for the rest of us, I have talked about before that I was part of Schwarzes Sonne, and that it involves the drinking of black goo in the initial initiation ceremony. And because I've been trying to write a book that answers 3 questions. Why did the Germans go into space? Where did they get their technology to go into space? And where did they get the occult knowledge to do the things they did once they got out there? So that's what my book is about. It's not going to be a space cowboy, shoot 'em up heroes kind of thing. It's going to be a nuts and bolts book with references from Earth and photographs of artwork and statues from the far past. So I've talked about before that I'm of that bloodline. I had a full 2-hour show where I went through my mother's side of my tree, and she's a Plantagenet. On my father's side of the tree, I'm a Stuart, a Plantagenet, a Velfen. The Velfen were the cousins of the Merovingians, and they shared grandparents. So they also were of the bloodline. They were just not the same trail. And they were the ones who ruled Austria and Burgundy and Switzerland and down the backside of the Alps and went into Italy. So, and they, all of these families intermarried with the daughters of the Eastern Roman Empire. Michael Komnenos was one of my ancestors, and he was one of the Eastern Roman Empire emperors. And when they took him out, they castrated his sons, and all that was left of his bloodline was his one daughter that was married off into Europe. So, yeah, his family was actually Armenian, and they had intermarried further east, which that line ends up with Genghis Khan in my tree. So these ruling classes are intermarried. When I talk about 1,000 years ago, we're talking the time Robert I in France. All the ruling class from Ireland to Japan were from this bloodline. Now, they had intermarried with the people they ruled, so they didn't look like they were the same family, but they were. And we still have that heritage today. And these are the bloodline that some of these groups have sworn to protect. And when he talked about that Swedish Masonry was still honoring that bloodline, that's what he's talking about. Now, this bloodline, according to my sources, this bloodline goes back to the first human king in Sumeria. And that's 5,000 years ago. So that's a long time for these people to spread out. Now, does that mean I think I'm better than anybody else? No. Ask anybody that's known me long term, and I have been a thorn in my family's side because I have always believed that there should be equality before the law, that there should be equality of opportunity, and that there should be a level playing field. And for those of you who don't listen to both sides, my family's response was, we already own this. Why should we give it away? Think about that one for a while. Now, I told them that if you don't make room for everyone else, that their solution will be the French Revolution again. And what that was guillotines and executions, and they killed children. Now, to their benefit, the actual French Revolution had trials. They tried to make sure that they only executed the guilty. But then you go into the Russian Revolution, and they just wiped out whole families. If you were involved in the aristocracy, you got killed, even if you were a child. So, now the next thing that I need to talk about is most of the people in these bloodlines are completely unaware. Completely unaware. Okay? You have a king that has 10 kids. The first one is sacrificed. The second one replaces him, unless he dies as a child, and then the third one does. The first daughter gets married off to the most loyal courtier in his kingdom. The second daughter gets married off to his enemy. And the rest of the kids don't have jobs. So they're taught trades, and they're given enough money to establish them in a trade, at which point they become the middle class. Now, when you look at the world, you have the aristocracy, you have the middle class, and you have the working class. For 5,000 years, they have been pushing their excess children into the middle class. How many middle class people do you know that have no idea who their grandparents were, much less who they're descended from 1,000 years ago? A lot of these people have changed names, especially if they're Americans. Americans, if you came to the United States from another country and you did not have an English or British name, they would give you an English name. And it may or may not be even close to what your family was called originally. And then you would have to reestablish everything with this new name. And your grandchildren might not even know what your name was before. And now here we are, how many generations later? My family came here in the 1600s. Both both my American ancestors and my French Canadian ancestors all came in the 1600s. I have French Canadian ancestors that we cannot make the jump across the Atlantic to even know where they came from. And then they married American Indians. Most of the time, we don't even know what tribe. And you're trying to figure out who you are, what you are, where your people came from. My mother had no clue what her ancestry was. She says, well, we're just Americans, don't worry about it. So I had this compulsion to know. And once I reached a certain point on my family tree, on a public website, ancestry.com, I started being contacted because those people who are watching such things know that when you make a connection to certain ancestors, that means you're one of them. And yeah, I started my family tree on Ancestry in 2005. And by the time that I was established in social media, I was being contacted by people. My first contacts were with the meritocratists, who are an Illuminati group. And I asked them how many people they wanted to kill, because isn't that what all Illuminati groups want to do, is kill off 80% of the population? So I asked them how many they wanted to kill. They admitted to wanting to kill anybody below 140 IQ. Well, I would have made the cut, but a lot of the people I really care about wouldn't. So I said, no, thank you. And they said, well, when you change your mind, we'll be happy to have you. And then they gave me access to their online library and told me I could download anything I wanted. Well, I have a 0.5 terabyte of things I downloaded that I wanted. And that's why I know a lot of the stuff that I know. So it doesn't get any easier knowing these things, because most of these groups out there don't include women. And so here I am. I've read all these documents. I have an awareness. I have been really blessed that Leo Zagami was willing to be on my show today. I have been really blessed by my friendship with Shane the Ruiner. I have been really blessed by my friendships with a dozen other people who are not public, who are members of various organizations, who have been willing to answer my questions honestly. And so now I'm stuck. I understand a lot I understand the way the world works. I'm just trying to figure out how to document it in my own book, where that when I explain what happened to me, y'all can understand it. Because what I experienced is so far out of the ordinary that even though I have been verified as telling the truth by the CIA archivist who uploaded my file, there are still lots of people who just think I'm delusional. So, why does it matter? Because that bloodline still rules the world behind the scenes. They are still the elites. They still control power and resources and the courts and how laws are made and then enforced. They control who goes to war, when, and over what. They control your religions. They control your media. They control the propaganda that you're fed. Have you ever wondered why you are so adamant about your political views? Can you justify them logically? Can you explain why you believe what you do? It's a lifetime of propaganda and brainwashing. Now, does that mean that what you're taught is wrong? Not always. Sometimes we're taught the truth because mixing lies with truth is what makes you swallow the lies. I don't know. I talk to people and they tell me all kinds of stuff. And it seems to me that the bigger the lie, the faster they swallow it. Which really frustrates me because I make a point of telling the truth as I know it, always. So if I find out I'm wrong, I'll change what I said. But it is always towards more truth rather than less. And that's not a real common practice. I also hold other people's secrets. I don't claim to have experienced things because someone else told me about it. I will say, I know someone who did. If they're not public. If they're public, I'll name them. Unless they're one of the handful of people that tell me, don't ever say my name. And those people might as well be dead to me because I'm not going to say their name. Now, I do have religious beliefs. I believe in the creator of all that is. I do not follow a Abrahamic faith. I have studied Abrahamic faiths. So when I'm talking to someone who is a strong believer like Leo, I can speak his language.